Then there's that. I like that. We're all spots on the same cow.
Me too.
Who's that from?
Okay, good afternoon or early evening, I guess it is now. And welcome to It's No Secret, live from Fly on the Wall Productions, right here on North Main Street in Barrie, directly across the street from Nelson's Ace Hardware. Um, in the studio with me tonight is a guest that we've had before and that I've been waiting to have come back until after the legislative journey, I guess we'll call it, because it has been a journey, finished up for this year. Super early in the morning too. I heard it wrapped up at like 2:30 in the morning on Sunday. That's so they put in their time for sure. But welcome, Dr. Rick Barnett. It's good to have you.
I'm so happy to be back again, Raylene.
Yes, I love having you in here. And plenty to talk about. Um, and we might as well, let's first hear what you've been up to since the last time I saw you.
Yeah, well, I'm a clinical psychologist and an addictions counselor, and I work in Stowe, private practice, and have a couple of clinicians that work with me. And I also help out the state of Vermont with the DUI program. It used to be called Project Crash, but now it's called the IDRP, the Impaired Driver Rehabilitation Program. So I've been doing that with the state of Vermont since 2019, helping people get their licenses back by providing education and counseling for their reinstatement. Really like doing that work to help people. It's not a punitive process. It's a serious undertaking, but people want to get their licenses back and they want to
Mm-hmm.
get back into their lives, and going through our program really helps them get back driving again safely and hopefully changing their relationship to alcohol and drugs. I know it's mandated, but sometimes mandated experiences can be beneficial. It doesn't have to be a total drag, but it's hard to go through the process. Been doing that for a while, and yeah, working on legislation. That's something I do through the Vermont Psychological Association as the chair of the legislative committee for the Vermont Psychological Association. And one of the bills that we've been working on for 8 years now is what's called prescriptive authority for appropriately trained psychologists with a doctorate and a master's degree in psychopharmacology.
Mm-hmm.
So specialized training, specialized psychologists who go ahead and get advanced training to really help address the mental health crisis that we have by more appropriate prescribing practices and frankly, de-prescribing practices,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that most people get their psych meds from a primary care clinic, from a
Right.
nurse practitioner, from a primary care practitioner, physician, with little to no training in mental health in any kind of formal way. But they have training in medicine, And so they're licensed to prescribe all kinds of medicines, including psych meds. But I don't know if they're the best people, the best providers to get psych meds from, especially in a 10 or 15-minute visit once every
I agree.
3 months or
Yeah,
something like that.
I
So
agree.
yeah, it's been a slog. It's really hard to sort of change people's minds about what they think about psychiatric medications, who is qualified to prescribe, why are these meds being prescribed, are they overprescribed in some cases? Absolutely. Most often inappropriately prescribed. And so we've been trying to get doctor level psychologists with advanced training and prescribing practices, knowing the drugs well, knowing body systems well, disease pathologies, and being able to prescribe and deprescribe. But the legislature it's a funny place, and they're very cautious about what's called scope of practice changes. They're very cautious. They always listen to the physicians. The medical establishment has their ear, and if there's something goes against the medical establishment, they are very hesitant to.
I'm actually a little shocked by that sometimes. I just wonder. I mean, that's why we have endocrinologists and you know, other doctors, other type of doctors, oncology. You wouldn't necessarily want your primary care provider providing your chemotherapy, your radiation. You wouldn't want them doing that. It surprises me that it's not viewed as sort of the same thing, where this is a life-saving medications that you're prescribing. In many cases, it is.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example. One of the conversations we had back in 2017 with UVM Medical Center and the head of the Vermont Psychiatric Association. One of the psychiatrists said, "Look, I'm a psychiatrist, and I wouldn't prescribe chemotherapy medications," and that's absolutely correct. And the argument against psychologists prescribing is that what if we give these psychologists prescriptive authority? They're going to start prescribing all kinds of medications, and it's like, no, we're not. We're going to prescribe and deprescribe appropriate medications within our scope. Just like a psychiatrist isn't going to prescribe chemo, a prescribing psychologist isn't going to be prescribing chemo or hormone replacement therapy or anything like that. We're going to be prescribing psychiatric medications or medications that are typically used to help people with mental health, emotional struggles, even addictive disorders. We talk about life-saving medications. We know that Suboxone, buprenorphine, can really help some people. In some cases, is it misprescribed? Yes. In some cases, are the people who need it most not getting it? Yes. And what about their mental health issues? People with addictions have high rates of trauma, mental health conditions, and if you just go see a prescriber who prescribes methadone or bupe, but they're not addressing your trauma,
they're not getting help.
They're not getting the help they need. We know how many of these opioid-related deaths are. Some are obviously accidental. Some might be, I don't care whether I live or die, so I'm just going to shoot whatever I'm going to shoot into my arm and see what happens, not intending to kill themselves. And then some of it's just like, misdiagnosed, undiagnosed depression, trauma. Sometimes people are being prescribed not only Suboxone, but they're being prescribed 2 different SSRIs, 2 different benzodiazepines, an antipsychotic medication to augment their antidepressant medication. And next thing you know, you have 5, 6, 7 medications on board treating what? And the combination is deadly in some cases.
It's not necessary. And often, I mean, you have to also back off of those medications and be able to do that under the guides of somebody that's a trained professional that can help you, but you don't just all of a sudden stop taking those one day safely. and someone like you could counsel through that. And I would want that to happen for me and for many that I speak with here. Many people that I know that are in active addiction, many people that I know that have been on the Suboxone program for many years. I know somebody who recently have it's not that recent. It's been over a year now. She's been trying to get the help she needs to get off the program because she wants a couple of years with nothing to start thinking about having a family.
Mm-hmm.
And she can't get that support to do that, and you can't just stop.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's key. That in a lot of cases, whether it's something like Suboxone or methadone, or it's like an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, oftentimes, again, it's being prescribed without any formal counseling. Simply going into your primary care practice and getting your prescription, having a 10-minute visit or so with maybe the medication-assisted treatment team or a nurse practitioner, a nurse, somebody, once every 3 months, 6 months, and, having those requests, having those longer conversations about what's your motivation to come off? What's our strategy? How can we work together to make this happen for you? They don't have the time or the relationship with the prescribers or the providers to be able to do that effectively. If you're meeting with somebody who you trust and there's a good rapport, good relationship with, once a week, once every other week for an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, and really talking these things through. I mean, the research is pretty clear. The combination of medications and psychotherapy is far better than either alone. So just doing therapy in some cases isn't enough. Just taking a pill sometimes isn't enough. But having both, and also because of having the therapy there, as soon as somebody wants to start talking about coming off of it, especially with somebody who knows, you don't just stop taking your meds, but somebody who's going to be with you every step of the way and gradually help you, build the skills you need to deal with life on life's terms without the medication, and go slowly tapering off, whether it's an opioid like buprenorphine or methadone, or even if it's an SSRI like Lexapro or citalopram or Zoloft, sertraline, coming off of it slowly, not like cut it in half one week, cut it in half again the following week, and then go cold turkey after that. No, I mean, it's been pretty well studied now that that's not the way to taper off some of these medications.
It can be dangerous.
It can be dangerous. It can be wicked uncomfortable, and people aren't prepared for it. They just think, oh, there's no real tolerance here. I don't have no real dependence on it. It doesn't really mess me up. I'm so used to it. I could just come off of it, no problem. And, usually what happens is it's the weeks that follow your last dose, no matter how low you go. You can go down to really low levels of methadone or really low levels of buprenorphine and Suboxone. And when you go from a very little bit to zero, you've got at least 8 to 10 weeks where at least your body has to adjust to what that feels like. And that's a very vulnerable period. And if you relapse, especially with opioids, after being off of everything for several weeks, and you get a batch of whatever that's got really potent fentanyl in it or something like that, your tolerance is way down. That's a deadly, deadly recipe. So really having somebody there with you all along the way, especially through that very vulnerable time, is so important. So I think it's another strong argument for why psychologists with specific training in psychopharmacology, medications, and also really good skills when it comes to counseling and being present with people, being non-judgmental, really connecting with them. It's a winning combination, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm very biased. I really still don't understand the argument against prescriptive authority for psychologists with the special training. I can understand somebody gets a master's degree in counseling and they want to start prescribing. No, you can't just get a master's degree or even a doctoral degree in psychology and start prescribing medications. You need specialized training. And that training that I've done and several people like myself have done an extra 3 or 4 years on top of a 6-year doctoral degree. It's a lot of
It's a lot of
education.
work, right?
It's a lot of
You
work.
didn't just say, "Give me the pad because I want to write this."
Exactly.
Right. You've done what you need to do to make sure that you're doing it safely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild.
And you've been fighting 8 years
Yeah,
already.
8 years. So our last bill was brought up by the Office of Professional Regulation. This is at the Secretary of State's office. There's an organization called the Office of Professional Regulation, and they regulate something like 50 some odd different professions, from massage therapists to real estate licenses. They do nursing. They do a lot of the mental health disciplines. And they had a process that they looked at the training for these prescribing psychologists. They were willing to take a look at it and see if there's something that they could get behind in terms of helping the legislature understand what's involved and make a recommendation. Well, we're still waiting for that recommendation, but they did present some information about the bill that we had last year. That bill did not get taken up for testimony this year, and so it's going to die. And that means we have to get another bill. This is going to be our 9th year when we go into this next biennium to see if we can change some minds about the value of this. Again, I think the Vermont Medical Society, the Board of Medical Practice, and the UVM Medical Center, Vermont Psychiatric Association, all these high-powered medical institutions are really unwilling to flex when it comes to this expansion. I really don't get it. You have the same argument against nurse practitioners. Do you know how hard nurse practitioners fought to get practice authority, independent practice authority, prescription privileges? They fought for years, and they gutted it out. I mean, what it's called? They really did it, and it took them a long time. Even physician assistants, they have prescriptive authority, and they
often have much more training than even your primary care provider, because they've gone through all of those steps to learn more and more and more and more.
Right. So scope of practice changes have been happening all throughout the history of medicine, the history of healthcare. And each step along the way, the medical establishment fights against anybody that tries to do what physicians can do. And I think it's too bad. I think it's too bad to have these knockdown, drag-out fights, and who says who can do what based on what education and training. It's really counterproductive.
And really probably money fits in there somewhere, I'm sure, which is horrible too.
Yeah, in some cases, I just it's mind-blowing to me that people would characterize it as a money grab or a turf war based on money, because people are dying. The suicide rate is skyrocketing. Deaths from addiction is skyrocketing. People are in despair since COVID. So many mental health issues out there that there aren't enough of us anyway. Why are we fighting with each other about who can do what? Do you have solid qualifications to practice in the healthcare system, or don't you? Are there licenses? Are there systems set up to regulate and be able to ethically and safely practice whatever discipline that you are? Yes, there are. I mean, Raylene, there are 7 states that have prescribing psychologists in them. 7 states already. Just last year, Colorado passed prescriptive authority for psychologists. Utah just passed prescriptive authority for psychologists. So pretty soon here, Vermont's going to be left behind. And this workforce it's not meant to sort of, save the world or cure all the mental health crises across the state of Vermont, but every little bit helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I mean, we do tend to follow after Colorado. So maybe, just maybe, next time you'll be able to get it in there. It seems, and I told you before we started, the court cases and things that I hear lately, where you'll have somebody who has essentially prescribed, and it's somebody that is also in an active addiction, but they're selling drugs, and that they actively are prescribing, they'll say, I gave him or her this amount and told them to be careful, or I told them to only take this amount, and they're not getting the same punishments that you would get. When I look at that, it makes me incredibly angry, because I think, you know, if I always think in the back of my mind how hard you have fought, and I think if you did that same thing, if you said, you know what, screw it, I'm going to help this guy, and I'm just going to prescribe this to him anyway, somehow, I don't care how I get it, you would lose your license, your livelihood, and you would probably be in jail. And if the person died as a result, the same thing, you would probably be charged much greater. And it's frustrating to me that even the government, they don't want to take a look at, that's how desperate they are. That's how desperate they are. And if they just were allowing you to help, maybe that desperation wouldn't come.
Yeah, exactly.
And they would still be here.
Yeah, let us help. Why get in the way? You've got ready, willing, and able providers with exceptional training to be able to help people. And why would anybody want to get in the way of that? And, to your point, I think that one of the arguments that I think is probably the most unfounded and devastating characterization of people like myself who want to help so badly is physicians will say they just want to make money by prescribing medications, and they're just going to be prescribing all kinds of medications that's going to harm people, and people are going to be overprescribed and prescribe the wrong medications, and the sky's going to fall and everybody's going to die from these inappropriate prescribing practices. And it's like, holy shit, really? You really think that's going to happen? People who are primarily trained as psychologists, mental health folks who know how to be with people in the room for an hour at a time, who get specialized training to know when to conservatively prescribe or deprescribe psychiatric medications.
Right.
It's been shown in research that the prescribing practices of prescribing psychologists are far more conservative than those of primary care physicians.
Well, you're not giving a cocktail of different things to see what works. We'll add this, take away that, up this, lower that.
Right. Because it's not
see if it works.
It's not the only tool in our toolbox. We actually get to spend time with people and talk to them and listen. Yeah. We don't have only a prescription pad and 10 minutes to help somebody.
Right.
And so these prescribers are under a tremendous amount of pressure. Like, well, we got to do something. Well, we'll add this to your antidepressant. We'll add this to your sleep medication and all these kinds of things to counteract the side effects of the other medication we gave you and all that kind of stuff. And like, they don't take the time to find out that actually their dog died and they're struggling this week, and that's why they're crying.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't tell me your dog died. We weren't talking. We only had 10 minutes. That seems like important. I don't know why I just added an extra medication.
And I had to also take your temperature and blood pressure because you're here in my office, and I had to do that as well.
Exactly.
Read all the meds that you have on your list to make sure that that's still accurate. And so maybe you have 2 minutes to talk to somebody.
Yeah. It's interesting. Speaking of Colorado. One of the things in the legislature that did pass this year, at least it passed the House and the Senate, is what's called an advisory group for psychedelic therapy. And here you have, I think, in my opinion, an interesting combination of a drug, which people would maybe call it a street drug, like magic mushrooms. Right? Call it a street drug. You have it called a medicine to treat mental health conditions. And you have a strong psychological or philosophical component, because when you take something like magic mushrooms, you trip and you have a subjective experience. It's not just all like visual kind of stuff. You have a deep sort of what's called a mystical experience. So you have the psychological, the medical, the recreational, all combined into one experience in a way.
Mhm.
And the legislature decided, look, this seems like promising research. It seems like it helps people with depression. It helps people with trauma, with anxiety. It even helps people with addiction. There's studies to show that people who take magic mushrooms actually reduce their alcohol use significantly. They stop using cocaine. There are studies looking at mushrooms for opioid use disorder.
Mhm.
So the legislature actually saw the light, so to speak, and we got some support to set up this advisory group. And basically, if the governor signs it, I don't know what you think. I don't know if he's going to sign it or not, but it's just an advisory group to look at the
Right. It's
research.
just you're looking at
We're
it.
just looking at it, and we're charged with writing a report to the legislature in November or December or something, and giving them our recommendations.
So that's a win for you because you've been doing this for a while as well.
Yeah, for the last 5 years, I've done a deep dive into the research on all types of psychedelic medicines and experiences, whether it's ketamine, which is legally approved now, or things like psilocybin mushrooms, ayahuasca, LSD, 5-MeO-DMT. There's a bunch of psychedelic compounds out there that are being studied for all kinds of things. Again, addiction, depression, anxiety, end of life anxiety and depression, which is like palliative care, PTSD. So it's quite possible that MDMA, also known as Molly or ecstasy, the
Right.
love drug, that's going to be a prescription medication sometime early next year.
That a doctor,
That a
your
doctor
primary care provider might be able
might be able to
prescribe,
prescribe MDMA
but
to,
you can't.
but I can't.
Yeah.
Exactly. Even though I've got all this sort of training, and it's pretty ironic. People do get confused. Like I'm not fighting the fight for prescriptive authority so that I can prescribe psychedelic medicines.
Right.
That I've been on this path for a long before all this research came out about
Right.
psychedelics. So, but that's an interesting development that these therapies are going to come to mainstream medicine, whereas for a long time people, and even now, if you think of Molly or ecstasy, you think of like recreational use, the
Right.
stigma associated with that, an addictive medication, or addictive drug, or magic mushrooms or LSD. There's still so much stigma associated, but when used in a therapeutic context with intention, not at a concert or around a campfire while you're pounding beers and smoking weed.
Right.
If you do it with the eye shades and the special music and you're just relaxing in a very safe, quiet setting and having all these internal experiences with somebody there next to you to keep you safe and process anything that needs to come up, it can be extremely transformative. So it's kind of interesting to see. It's really exciting to see how this is all going to shake out.
So they do. Are they doing similar in Colorado, or has that already passed where they're actually using it as a prescription?
So Colorado has a system in place where I believe they did a massive decriminalization, which is what we tried to do here in Vermont, to just decriminalize the possession and use of mushrooms. I mean, you can grow mushrooms in your closet. They grow wildly out in cow patties and stuff. So,
Right.
so it's so funny that this thing that grows so rampantly and naturally is illegal. You can't pick it out of the cow patty and put it in your pocket, or else you're going to go to jail. So why don't we just decriminalize it? The fact is that everybody and their cousin seems to be microdosing psilocybin these days.
Right.
It's very easy to access these compounds, whether it's over the internet or growing it in your closet. And so the fact that they're criminalized, it just makes no sense. But the legislature did not have a stomach for that this session.
Well, you got a lot further than you've gotten before.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a great thing.
It's a win, yeah.
And for me, I'm most interested in what it can do to help somebody who is struggling with cocaine addiction, because there are all kinds of things, aids out there to help with other drugs, but there really isn't anything right now for cocaine.
Right. Yeah.
You just are supposed to just stop it.
Right.
And it doesn't happen that way
Right.
at all.
Yeah. Coke,
Mm-hmm.
meth,
Mm-hmm.
even people who use large amounts of Adderall or Ritalin, snorting any type of stimulant, crack,
Mm-hmm.
crack. It's
Crack.
all.
That's what my son does. He's
Yeah.
crack addict.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
there are no medications for that. There are no approved medications. They've been looking at things like vaccines for cocaine use disorder and
Mm-hmm.
other types of medicines. But the fact that things like mushrooms have been shown in small studies to significantly reduce cocaine consumption in people who are identified as having a disorder with, misusing cocaine in massive amounts. Even another drug that people don't talk about very much called ibogaine from the West African root, the iboga root, again, naturally grown substance that shows incredible promise for people with both opioid use disorder and stimulant use disorder, cocaine, crack, crystal meth, that kind of stuff. And so there are these promising tools. So the more we can do in terms of research and getting people safe access to these compounds and these experiences in a healthy, intentional setting, not just, taking a bunch of ibogaine and seeing what happens, but doing it with a skilled practitioner, we could save lives. And it's really important that we start to get behind it. There's still a lot of resistance out there. People are like the argument against methadone and Suboxone, right? You're just switching one drug for another. Like, what are you talking about? Using a drug to treat a drug problem? Like, how is that supposed to help? Well, what are we talking about? Think about like the nicotine patch or nicotine gum, or even vape pens. People are trying to get off cigarettes and smoking vape pens. We're substituting one drug for another. Methadone, buprenorphine, it's fine. I mean, it's if it helps somebody get healthy, why are we getting in the way of that?
Right.
Why are we making arguments?
And it can help get healthy because then you are working with hopefully somebody like you who's working through all of the things that put you in the situation that you were in to begin with. And sure, you're going to take it for a while, but there will be a point where you probably work with the professional to stop using that as well and to just be well.
Yeah. The difference with psychedelics, all the psychedelics, is that they're not maintenance medications. So like nicotine, when you use the patch or the gum, that's a maintenance medication. Suboxone, methadone, that's a maintenance medication. It's a daily, you're taking it every day. Think about depression medications. You're taking depression medications every day. Psychedelic experiences are just once, sometimes maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of a year, maybe 2 or 3 times over the course of a few months, but they're just single episode treatments. And all the work, as you say, all the work is done before and after the experience. The experience is just a catalyst, but you're doing a lot of preparation, a lot of counseling on the front end, and then you're heavily backloading the experience. Someone has just had a transformative, heart-opening, mind-opening, expansive experience, and they need time to process what the heck just happened. And having a skilled practitioner in the weeks and months that follow to process all the changes that are taking place, it's really, really fascinating and super important. It's less about the drug itself. It's not a maintenance medication. It's a one-shot experience that opens your mind, changes your perspective, opens your heart, allows you to get out of the familiar stuck pathways and problems and thought processes, and set those down and be able to look at the world fresh and say, oh my gosh, I've got a new understanding of myself, of my relationship to cocaine, and my relationship to my family, my social life. I've got a whole new framework to deal with here. This is fascinating. That's what happens even.
And it's frightening.
Yeah.
It's because it's literally a whole new world.
It is.
So it's frightening.
It can be frightening. So having support, having integration, whether it's a peer support group. I mean, how important are peer support groups in regular addiction recovery, right? It's the community, the fellowship is vital. And so this is a very similar process. You plug yourself into like-minded folks who have had these really important, sometimes challenging experiences, and to be able to sort of find support and find their way through to health and healing and wellness and in the long term, not just a quick fix kind of thing.
Now, in all of your years of practicing, do you find that when it comes to addiction and people struggling, that certain traumas fit with certain drugs that they're using, that somebody who maybe is addicted to crack, maybe you see a greater number of them that suffer from something else other, or somebody that's maybe addicted to heroin? Do you find that their traumas or their depression is very different at all?
I don't think I personally have not been able to discern or sort of sift out like, oh, this group of people who've had these types of traumas seem to be most attracted to this type of drug experience or this type of habit or problematic behavior, or people with this type of depression seem to like this. I mean, if you just take a look at alcohol as an example, anybody who, whether they have trauma or not, can develop a really unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And alcohol is used by some people with severe complex PTSD to help cope with their anxiety or their nightmares, to help them go to sleep, all those kinds of things. And some people use alcohol to help cope with depression or whatever. But it's not, there isn't a pattern that has unfolded that people have been able to research or recognize that, oh, these type of people seem to more commonly use alcohol, and these type of people. It's really, addiction is something, interestingly, it does not discriminate. I think,
Definitely not.
rich or poor, healthy background, trauma background, education level, etc. Like anybody can fall into a really unhealthy relationship with a substance or a behavior, frankly. Talk about gambling or sex addiction, porn addiction, or food. These are all other really important types of addiction that it's not necessarily trauma in all cases that caused the addiction. And then what about people who really didn't have any trauma in the first place, but they started to use drugs and all kinds of traumatic things started to happen, and it's because of their drug or alcohol use that they developed trauma.
Right. And there are some people that are just, it's not even, like you say, there's not that they've had any trauma, but maybe they are an adrenaline junkie and they've done all of these great things and they're just not getting that high from anything else in their life at the moment. And that's what they're searching for. They're not really searching, they're just looking for the hype and the high of life.
Yeah, sensation seekers, like low cortical arousal, people who need that extra stimulation. Sensation seekers are people who may be at more risk for developing addictive disorders. One thing, Raylene, that I've seen that, I mean, again, not to make a sweeping generalization, but to some extent, a lot of addictions can be related to people who feel like at some point in their young life, an important person or persons let them down, like a small T trauma. So dad didn't show up at the baseball game, or mom was never there for her for me when I needed her, or my friends, I thought they were my friends and they embarrassed me and they humiliated me in front of everybody. Like people in their young lives can have these really powerful letdown experiences of people, like people who they thought they trusted, that they were always going to be there for them, did something that broke that trust. And that can be, in a young person's life, that can be devastating. And I think for some people who've had that experience, at the same time, if they happen to find cigarettes or they happen to find their their parents' porn stash, or they happen to have a bunch of Twinkies or donuts in the fridge,
Yeah.
and they just turn to that and they're like, well, this feels good. This is reliable. I can always get access to this feeling. It's always right here. If I just have alcohol with me or nicotine with me or food or porn, if I always have that with me, that's within my control. I can have a reliable, trustworthy source that will always be there with me. It'll never leave me. I have that very, very strong memory of myself as a young person with nicotine, where I can remember going on a hike with a bunch of buddies at like 12 or 13, and we were going up the steep hill, and I'm like huffing and puffing, and I was like, couldn't wait to have a cigarette when I got to the top of the mountain. I remember saying to myself as I was hiking, I will always be okay as long as I have cigarettes. Nothing will ever harm me as long as I have my reliable cigarettes. And it's very challenging to break that, because, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to set down the drug or the addictive behavior and turn back to the world of people who let you down in the first place. It's very painful to sort of try to turn back towards the world of people to say, can I trust you now? So I've seen that a lot with people with addictive behaviors.
I am absolutely addicted to cigarettes. I have tried numerous times to quit and have been very unsuccessful every time. I think the longest I've made it in recent years is like 3 days.
Yeah.
That's it. And then, and I always use the excuse, well, this happened or that happened, or I'm nerved up about this, or, I always have an excuse of why I needed to go back to it, because it made me feel better.
Yeah.
While it's killing me.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's really difficult. I mean, I haven't had any nicotine in my system for 11 and a half years. And I can tell you that insidious voice that tries to convince me on a fairly regular basis, that comes up with all kinds of crazy ideas about why it's a really good idea
to just
that
have one.
today is the day that you should buy those Zins because you never tried Zin, and that's really, that's harmless.
Yeah.
Or in the psychedelic world, there's this thing called hape, which is like a fine tobacco powder that's used ceremonially with Native Americans or in certain medicine circles. It's straight up nicotine tobacco. And like, I can't touch this stuff. I can't have anything that has any nicotine in it whatsoever. I am off to the races. And the excuses that my mind comes up with to try to convince me that, it'll help you concentrate much better. You've got this thing you got to work on, or you just need to relax. You're allowed to relax. It's a harmless thing, or, you won't get addicted again. Just do it this one time, or just try it. You'll be fine.
Yeah,
and
you can't.
Yeah,
That is exactly what I do. I always say, I'll just go to somebody. I'm trying to quit. So I'll go to somebody and say, I just want one. I don't want to buy a pack. I just want one.
Yeah.
3 hours later, I'm buying a pack.
Yeah.
Because that one did not work
Right.
the way I needed it to.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one time I hadn't had any nicotine, any cigarettes for about 5 years. And I think I was in my late 20s, and I went to Brazil to visit my brother, who was living down in Brazil at the time. And here I am in Brazil. I don't speak the language, and we're at this beach area, and there's a bunch of young people sitting around, and I'm just hanging out, and there's cigarettes around. And I was like, well, I'm in Brazil. It's been 5 years. I can just have one. I shit you not. I hadn't had nicotine or cigarettes for 5 years. I smoked 15 cigarettes, nearly a pack of Marlboro Reds in one night. Like I was making up for lost time. Yeah. My body was just like, thank you. Where have you been all my life? Yeah. And I just chain smoked for like the next, 2 hours. And the next day I was like, what the fuck just happened?
Right.
Like 5 years. And I was just like, right back at it. I was like horrified. Of course, that sent me off on another several years of using nicotine off and on. But
so you didn't stop right away.
No. Oh no. I mean, I'm so surprised now that I have 11 and a half years, and I have no misconceptions that I am just as vulnerable to buying a pack of cigarettes or using some form of nicotine today as I was last year, as I was 10 years ago, as I was 3 days after I quit. Like there are times where I am wicked vulnerable to it, where like, again, that gremlin in my mind is like, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't you do it for this reason? And it's like, I tell myself like,
And I think you and I have talked about that before, even with any addiction, whether drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, whatever, that it actually takes a certain amount of time to work out of your system enough so that you can work through it each time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's work.
And it's years.
Yeah.
It doesn't go
Yeah.
away in even a year.
Yeah.
It's years.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a guy in my office today who uses cannabis regularly, uses alcohol regularly, uses nicotine regularly. Older gentleman, been doing it for years. And I actually disclosed that I hadn't used nicotine for 11 and a half years. And I said, I'd rather be on this side of it than the other side of it. I'd rather be on the side of like, gosh, I'd really like to, engage in that. I'd really like to have some nicotine in my system, but just for today, I'm gonna, or just for the next 5 minutes, I'm gonna hold that off, rather than being like where you are, which is addicted to cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times a week or a day do you tell yourself, gosh, I wish I could quit? Like, it's much, for me, for now anyway, it's much better to be on the side of like, oh, I feel the call to use it again, versus like the daily grind of like having to use this substance on a daily basis. It costs money. It's
A lot of money too. It's so expensive.
It's so expensive, and it's just like I just felt like I was a slave to this experience.
I was super proud of myself today. I've been up at the polls. It's an election here today, and I didn't have a cigarette for 6.5 hours, and I thought, damn, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
As soon as I got in my car to have a break, I smoked 3 on the way home.
Yeah.
Like you say, making up for lost time.
Make up for lost time, exactly.
And so even though it's not even close to the same, it has definitely given me an understanding of where, like, even how hard things are for my son and how hard it is to be well and to stop using, because I mean, I just can't imagine. We just use different things to help with our stress, and unfortunately his happens to be crack that can kill him quicker than my cigarettes can kill me.
Yeah. It could. Yeah, but cigarettes are a long, slow death process. I think there's something like 500,000 people a year die from tobacco-related disorders, and that's like 4 times as many as opioid use disorder, 5 times as many as opioid use disorder.
Yeah.
So it does kill people, and large amounts of people, but very slowly.
Just not in the same ways.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's hard. It's a really well, crack and cocaine, that's a really hard one too. Again, there's no medication. Sometimes it's like the call to use, the craving for that drug or that experience. Sometimes can be overcome by the call to be well. A strong call. I mean, I would imagine that anybody who, like your son or you or anybody who has an addictive disorder, can say periodically there's a strong call to be well. I want to be healthy. The person example you gave is like, what about those people who are stable on their Suboxone, but they really want to not have to take this medication anymore on a daily basis, to have to get that script filled. They want to come off of it. They want to be free. The call to freedom from this bad habit, be a slave to this experience, is like, gets really strong sometimes, and that's what turns people around. The call to freedom is stronger sometimes than the call to the craving to use.
And you just got to hope that you get to that point, I guess.
Yeah.
I think, gosh, I thought we had been there many times, where he just says, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I can't. I got to do this. I got to do that. And even with consequences, huge consequences hanging over his head. And And sometimes I think that makes it worse. It's more stress. It's more um, the defiance
Mm-hmm.
and of it all. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's frightening for sure.
Yeah.
And um, every year we know more and more and more people that lose their lives to it. He's lost some really good friends, close friends, some that he considers family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tyler, the young man that this show is in memory of. We just lost him a year ago today,
Mm-hmm.
and um, that was super tough for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I really thought that was what was going to turn him around, and it did for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
He did really, really well.
Yeah.
And of course, I've gotten to the point where every day, every minute, every bit of it counts.
Mm-hmm.
Like I will take every second and then just pray but not hold my breath
Mm-hmm.
that he one of these times that's the time.
Yeah.
You don't ever know.
You never know. Yep. It could click at any given moment. I don't care how many times he's sworn it off. Any one of us has sworn it off. I mean, myself as an example, like I started using nicotine. I have addiction to alcohol and cannabis and other drugs as well, but nicotine really stands out for me. Starting to use nicotine when I was 10. So all of my developmental neural pathways were deeply entwined with nicotine from a very young age, from age 10 to 20, using nicotine on a regular basis, eventually up to a pack a day. And then at 20, I stopped for 3 years. And when I went back to it, it took me another 17 years of, I would say, over 24 times of trying to quit over the course of 17 years. And finally, now I have 11 and a half years of no nicotine.
Well,
but I didn't give up. I just kept trying as much as it was a crushing defeat. And obviously the consequences, as you said, the consequences of nicotine are far less suddenly shocking as like the consequences from dying from opioid use disorder or some alcohol related car accident or poisoning or some poly drug combination that kills somebody or puts somebody in the hospital, or a stroke from using crack where all of a sudden half your body doesn't work anymore because you've just stroked out from snorting too much coke. You're like, the consequences are devastating, but one must never give up, to keep trying. Just because you had 3 days or you had 5 days or you had 5 years and you went back to it, like just keep trying.
Right, get back up.
You never know when it's going to stick.
And I do tell them that. I always say, yes, you fell, but what matters is that you get back up and you try again. Mm-hmm. That's all we can ask for.
Yeah. That's why I think these psychedelics is, again, I'm not over promoting them. I would definitely qualify myself as a psychedelic enthusiast, but at the same time, they're not for everybody and there can be risks associated with it. But to have a new tool that shakes up the snow globe, so to speak, that gets people thinking differently about themselves, about their past, about their present, their future, their relationships, really changes their sort of a lot of perceptions in a way that no other therapy or drug or whatever can do, no other medication can do. It's promising. It can really be, for a subset of people, it can be really transformative. So,
and they have found that with ketamine.
Ketamine too, yeah. I've seen people 4 sessions of ketamine quit a 20-year alcohol habit after 4 sessions of ketamine. They're not doing ketamine every day. They're not going in for ketamine
like
every week.
A couple times a year, maybe.
Yeah, they go in for like a little, once every 2-3 months to have a ketamine experience with the help of a therapist. And there's no addiction. There's no, for some people, it's amazing. Same thing with like suicidal depression. People that live with depression for years, and then all of a sudden they have a series of ketamine treatments and their depression's all but gone, and they don't need to take medications on a daily basis, and they don't need to do therapy twice a week for the rest of their lives. They can have these one-time sort of experiences spread out over the course of a year with some counseling support along the way, and just a new model altogether to help people. It's fascinating.
I certainly think so. I mean, and I relate a little bit the ketamine therapy. What I've read quite a bit about it, and we looked into it for my son. Um, Kind of like an EMDR experience.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I mean, that's the therapy that finally helped me a lot. That's the therapy that I chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked. And but I didn't do that like multiple times for many years.
Right.
I had a few really good experiences with it that got me where I needed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much like EMDR. I'm glad you brought that up. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a process by which somebody sort of conjures up an image that is upsetting to them, some visual picture in their mind of some upsetting incident or something that represents upsetting, and you talk it out by having this bilateral stimulation. So either both hands with a clicker in both hands, or your eyes going back and forth for like whatever, a minute or so, and then checking in with the therapist, like, what are you experiencing now? You say, oh, I was just thinking about my dog and this thing that came up for me, and it's, okay, go with that. And you keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then you associate that with something else and something else. All these memories that are locked away, that are all somehow connected in the background of our minds, come to the foreground. You're like, oh, that's why I feel this way. I'm thinking that this represents that, and it's like, that's not what's happening.
Right, it's not even close.
It's not even close, and you're like, oh, and that is similar to what can happen with ketamine or psychedelic experiences. You start to connect the dots in your mind, in your heart, in your emotions, unlike anything you've been able to do through regular therapy or regular medications. Yeah. It really does help sort of, again, to shake up the snow globe, make new connections, and change the way people feel and behave in really positive ways for a lot of people, not for everybody. The same thing with EMDR. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for a lot.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was certainly, I didn't know anything about it. Somebody suggested it to me, and at first I thought, that's craziness. That is absolute craziness.
Yeah, it sounds like some sort of gimmicky thing.
Yeah, but I sought out a counselor, a local counselor that practiced. There's not a lot of them, and gave it a try, and it was the best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's an opportunity that I would love to see more people have.
Yeah.
On a scale with somebody like you that is able to provide the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I'm dedicated to is not only doing the clinical practice that I do every day, day in and day out. I love working with people one-on-one, but also providing education to healthcare practitioners, to the general public around these kinds of discussions, whether it's mental health conditions, treatments for mental health conditions, medications, psychedelic therapies, research, doing lots of webinars for folks. And actually, we're doing a major conference again, the third year in a row, the Psychedelic Society of Vermont, which is a group that I co-founded 3 years ago. It's all healthcare professionals. And we put on this annual conference up in Stowe. First year we had it at Trapp Family Lodge, and then last year and this year we're having it at Spruce Peak Arts Center up at the base of Mount Mansfield in Stowe. Nice. And we get like 200 or 300 people to come, and researchers from all over the world to present their research, or even underground practitioners, psilocybin practitioners, come and tell their experiences working with people in the underground. You know, there are people out there in Vermont and around the world, around the country, who are serving these medicines in healthy and ethical and safe ways. And, you know, sadly, they're doing it under the shroud of illegality. And that's just a big travesty in my opinion. I think these people should be able to practice what they're doing safely and effectively without the threat of law enforcement, criminal punishment. And And so putting on this conference every year is really such a delight, and having people, really respected researchers and folks from all around the world, come in, present their expertise to our healthcare practitioners, just to raise awareness around alternative therapies like psychedelic therapy. It's awesome. So that's actually coming up. Doing a shameless plug for that. That's coming up in September up in Stowe.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, we will hope that Governor Scott says, let's at least look into this a little further.
Yeah.
Let's let this group of people really break it down and bring it back to the table next year.
Yeah, I think he will. I mean, it's a pretty vanilla, low risk bill. There's not. I know that, like, I don't know if you heard this today, but I heard that Governor Scott is going to veto the safe injection site in Burlington. He believes that the $1 million that is allocated towards that in Burlington should go to existing treatment options for folks. And I think that's a shame, personally. I understand the rationale that he's using, but we need all the tools at our disposal. And if safe injection sites can save a life, and it can be done safely for $1 million, I think saving a life is, and many lives could possibly, for $1 million is worth it. The existing treatments are okay, but we need more. We need more tools.
Need more.
Yeah, and this is so. I don't even
the
psychedelic
know if in
bill.
Vermont I would call them okay at this point. What we have available.
I'm trying to stay out of that debate a little bit. I've gotten some heat for challenging the much nationally recognized and praised Vermont hub and spoke model. So I try not to criticize it too much, but I think it's good to have some of the tools that we have, and the way in which Vermont's trying to address the problem has been noble. But with the death rates having increased year after year after year since 2019, or even before that, just showing a slight drop this year is nice to get some good news. But too many people are dying still. So clearly the tools that we have are not enough. The psychedelic therapy bill is a low-risk bill, because all Governor Scott would be signing is a bill for people like the Board of Medical Practice, the Vermont Medical Society, the Department of Health, the Department of Mental Health, the Psychological Association, the Office of Professional Regulation, all these well-respected organizations to come together, put our heads together, write a report about, the strengths and weaknesses of this new therapy that's going to be FDA approved at some point anyway. We know MDMA will be FDA approved in a matter of months. We know ketamine's already approved, so that's happening. Psilocybin mushrooms is going to be an FDA medication in 2026 or 2027. So we're just trying to get out ahead of it.
Right. Well, we wish you luck.
Thank you.
As always, we're rooting for you to get these. And I'm most rooting for you for the prescriptions. I mean, the right for you to prescribe just seems like a no-brainer. It really does.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why anybody thinks they need to fight that so hard.
Yeah.
It's not stepping on toes. It's not taking over anyone's territory. It's really just doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. And thank you for the work that you do. The advocacy that you're doing with addiction and recovery is so needed. If we had like 400 more of you out there advocating the way you do, we'd keep trying to make a dent in this, because we need all the help we can get. Yeah.
I hope so.
Thank you.
But as always, thank you so much for coming in. We will let everybody get to their dinner, and I'm going to race back up to the polls, and they'll be closing soon, and so we'll do that, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me down.
And thank you all for joining us tonight. Take care.